Welcome to the Desert Blockchain monthly session on July 22nd, 2020. It's 7 p.m. Arizona time. And tonight we're going to be talking about blockchain and sustainability. And I'd like to start off by saying that, we're fortunate to have some legal scholars on the session tonight, and we're going to be talking about some of the issues that are cropping up around sustainability and carbon removal and trading and so forth. And we're going to be talking about issues that actually are problematic in realms beyond sustainability in this new realm of decentralization and blockchain. So as you're listening to the topics tonight, and the legal scholars talk about this, and our guest from the Energy Blockchain Consortium, I ask you to keep in mind that these issues are present in realms beyond sustainability, carbon removal, carbon trading, and so forth. So I'm delighted to introduce Professor Gary Marchant of ASU's Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law. And I feel particularly fortunate to know Gary and be acquainted with the ASU College of Law, because you are pioneering some, I think, critical things in the realm of contemporary technology and policy that are really a key part of creating what's next for Web 3.0, or the decentralization of our communications and relationships and so forth. So thank you for being here tonight, Professor Marchant. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Jay. It's great to be here. I'm getting some messages that my internet's unstable, so hopefully it doesn't affect too much as we go forward here. We'll see how it works. So what's really cool, I think, about blockchain, I love the Desert Blockchain events, is that we're just seeing so many applications of blockchain now emerging and really trying to help us deal with some real problems in society. And certainly that's the case with sustainability. So what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to give a brief introduction, and we're going to talk about 3 projects we're doing at ASU involving carbon trading, actually. And then we have a couple other people online, Jason from Nori and Tony from the Energy Blockchain Consortium, who are also going to provide some comments. So just starting off introduction, most of the public focus on blockchain and sustainability has been negative. It's the whole issue of, using a lot of energy for mining of cryptocurrencies, and that this is a big problem. And that is a concern. There's some solutions coming on that, I think. But there's also a lot on the positive side. So we're starting to see, articles like this in Nature, the most prestigious science journal in the world, saying the environment needs crypto governance. There's really important things that distributed ledgers or blockchains can do to really help us build trust in more sustainable activities, because people can say they're doing sustainable things, but unless you can really validate and verify that, it doesn't hold a lot of weight and people can't trust in that. So that's what the blockchain really can provide here, is more trust that things are happening that we want to happen, and can see that. So just on the area of sustainability, you may have saw yesterday that Apple said all its products and all its supply chains will be carbon neutral by 2030. They haven't said whether they're using the blockchain specifically, I don't believe, but they very well might end up doing this, particularly as they try to track all their supply chains and look at the carbon outputs of those different manufacturers and suppliers. But we do see a lot of examples now where the blockchain is being used in the sustainability or climate context. Last fall, the OECD put out a report about 70 pages on using blockchain to enable sustainable infrastructure. And they have a whole series of different projects in there, both real examples of case studies, but also applications that they think could be used going forward to use blockchain in various aspects of the climate field, in terms of financing, in terms of validating reductions. And they have a whole series of different interesting applications. And here's a link down there to the study if you want to look at it yourself. There's an article in Forbes earlier this month that blockchain could be the key in making environmental reporting more meaningful. Again, this whole issue of environmental, social, and governance reporting, a big, huge issue, but one of the big problems is validating and believing what people are saying. So again, blockchain can put some teeth behind that and actually help to validate that this is actually happening. So what we've been doing is looking at some projects specifically in the area of carbon trading and using blockchain to help validate that. And we have 3 specific projects we're working on this summer. We're going to go through those one at a time and having either the mentor or a student or both talk a little bit about that. So the first project is using representations, warranties, and in carbon offset trading. And we have Bill Brandt from ASU. He's going to start us off, and then we'll go to our student, Philip. So William Brandt is the Director of Strategic Integration at the LightWorks initiative at ASU, very innovative entity to try to figure out how to move forward a lot of these technologies and policies in sustainability. So Bill, do you want to take the microphone and go ahead?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Gary. Thank you very much. And welcome to everybody who's on this Zoom call. Gary, it was really good to hear your description about blockchain and where it's gone. And it's sort of like the journey that we've taken at the LightWorks Innovation Accelerator, which is let's explore this, let's investigate this, and then let's look at the opportunity set that sits there. And as we began thinking about blockchain, going back a year ago, we began realizing that the distributed ledger was actually going to be very powerful, that the ability to allow people to permission in their data and to have conversations. By conversations, I mean track and trace and understanding who's in, the chain up and down the system, felt to us like this was possibly a solution that would help us decarbonize the energy system much quicker than we could. Because when you really look through everybody's sustainability reports, and I'm talking about Siemens or ADM or others, the first thing they say is, right, we're going to buy renewable energy. And the second thing they do is they make investments in energy efficiency. And then the third thing they talk about is carbon offsets. And so we looked at that and said, well, look, there's an opportunity here because this is more than just about any one particular offsets. These offsets, because they have an intrinsic chain associated with them, there's a bit more here in the possibilities than there is in just buying a carbon offset like on the Chicago Board of Trade, which had something that was going. So with that, Gary and I and some others from this group, had a brainstorming session. We found some students who were very interested in working with us, and we started out to say, okay, so what are the legal issues that are required in order to create I'm going to call it a new carbon economy that's partly powered by blockchain.
Great. Okay, thanks, Bill. So Philip is our student working in this area. So Philip, I'll advance the slides for you. Just let me know when you want the next slide.
Absolutely. Yeah, so when we started discussing the legal implications of how we're going to govern the trading of carbon offsets, a couple of things came to mind, but essentially what I've been looking into specifically is kind of the current structure that we have in place to govern that, which is actually using contract law and the use of representations, warranties, to ensure that certain things happen in relation to that trading. So we can go move on. So generally speaking, representations and warranties, or reps and warranties, are a device we use in contract law. And more specifically, a representation essentially governs, it's something that I say relating to something that's already in existence, like my shirt is blue. and then warranties is a promise to act in a certain way or to refrain from acting in a certain way relating to something in the future. So there's a couple of examples of how reps and warranties have been used specifically relating to carbon offset trading. The examples I pulled were from the CTX exchange based out of London. So here highlighted, this is basically a warranty from any member that signs on to the CTX exchange, stating that after a certain amount of time, or after a purchaser uses their carbon offsets, they're going to retire it. They're not going to resell it or anything like that. And then there's one more example, the next slide here. So this is a different agreement between the City of Austin and CTX, essentially saying the same thing. If you look at section 2.4.5 here, it just basically says that in different language that they're not going to resell any of the carbon credits that they purchase. So what's the issue here? So very broadly, what we're concerned with is figuring out how we can prevent people and entities from purchasing carbon offsets using that credit for reporting, or just saying that they're carbon neutral, or whatever it is that they may be using it for, and then turning around and reselling it to someone else, so that there's now two individuals or two entities reporting the same carbon removal with no net reduction actually occurring. So spoiler alert, one way that we can fix that is reps and warranties, but they are only so effective and can only go so far within certain structures that we have now. So more specifically, some of the issues that come up when we're talking about reps and warranties relating to the trading of carbon offsets is that as it stands now, there's typically not enough incentive to actually bring any sort of action, even if there's a breach. So for example, the CTX member agreement that we had on the screen a little bit ago, yes, technically if someone were to purchase carbon offsets and then later resell them, they would be in violation of it. But realistically, in that agreement, the way it's set up, the only people that can bring an action on that for the breach would be CTX. And chances are it's not going to be worthwhile for them to pay all the legal fees, take it to court, drag it out, and actually pursue someone for violating their agreement. One reason for that is that the damage award not only is going to be likely difficult to prove, but monetary damages may not be sufficient in a case like this, where we're dealing with the injury being essentially that no new net carbon reduction has occurred because of the resale of a carbon offset. Money can't fix that, essentially. So it would take more than that, which courts can sometimes be hesitant to award without other specific language in the contract allowing for it as well. And then moreover, there's also many administrative difficulties in actually policing compliance, because CTX, for example, is just the market on which these offsets are traded. Right now, the way it's set up, it would be unlikely that they would actually learn of a buyer violating their agreement by reselling carbon offsets, just because once the transaction is complete, it's complete. There's not really an ongoing relationship with that buyer necessarily. And if they were to come up with some sort of mechanism where they actually monitored it, obviously costs would rise and it may not be feasible with their business model. And then the last specific issue here is that the way that a lot of these agreements are written, again, the contractual parties are just the trading market and the buyer, or the trading market and the seller. There's not really a direct relationship in these transactions between the buyer and the seller, meaning that the only person that can actually, or the only entity that can actually bring a lawsuit or any sort of action to enforce the reps and warranties within the agreement would be the trading market. It's so even if the seller, for example, found out that the buyer had resold the offset, they would have no standing to bring the case and it would be dismissed. So those are just kind of some of the more specific issues with using reps and warranties as they stand now and as they're typically written in, from what I've seen, in agreements governing these types of transactions. But some potential legal remedies that we can talk about, given, again, current constraints, would be that first and foremost, these agreements should include liquidated damages. So what liquidated damages are is they're basically a provision within the agreement itself saying if the agreement is breached in any way, the damages are X number of dollars, or the carbon offsets are void, or they spell it out so that courts don't have to fight over it. And what that goes to, that remedy, is not only makes it easier to prove damages and put a number on what is otherwise fairly arbitrary, but it also provides an incentive to the non-breaching party to bring an action. It's more likely that when there's a dollar value on it or something else, they're more likely to make that decision. Injunctive relief, kind of like what we just spoke about a little bit ago. These agreements need to have a provision in them spelling out that traditional compensatory monetary damages may not be sufficient, and they may, injunctive relief or some of other equitable relief from a court may be necessary to leave that option open should it actually go to court. And then, going towards the policing of this, it may not be the most effective, but one possible solution would be to require buyers of carbon offsets to, after a certain amount of time, actually come back to the trading market or come back to even the seller and certify that they had retired the carbon offsets that they purchased, so that you can actually keep track of whether those have been retired or if they've been resold. Obviously, there's some issues with that. People lie, but within the current framework, it is an option. And then lastly, for dealing with the lack of standing for sellers, making them a party to the actual contract and making the agreement not only between the trading market and the other party, whether that be the buyer or the seller, make the relationship more direct between the buyer and the seller so that they have standing. But that being said, that's within our current framework. And I'm sure that there are other solutions that include blockchain that would be a better option going forward for actually solving some of the administrative difficulties with enforcing these reps and warranties. So essentially, from what I can tell, I think blockchain might be the only solution which would essentially enable the public and other entities involved in these transactions to actually police whether or not those offsets are being resold. But that said, I kind of wanted to open it up a little bit, if that's possible, and figure out, if you guys might have any possible ideas on how blockchain can be used to solve some of these problems, because the legal framework is certainly not the answer to everything.
Great. Well, thanks, Philip and Bill. Jay, probably be best maybe if we go through all the talks and then open it up for any comments or suggestions or questions.
Yep, that works.
Okay. So, hold that thought of, how could we use blockchain in this context? But let's move on then to the next topic, which is jurisdictional issues with international carbon offsets. And a student working on this is Zachary Cooper is on the line, but David McCarville, attorney here in town, is working on this. He's going to give the presentation.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Gary. So yeah, jurisdictional issues and international carbon offsets. First, I want to define what the carbon offset project is. It's basically a way to capture 1 ton of greenhouse gas emissions, and that is the equivalent of 1 carbon credit. So if you're buying a carbon credit, you're basically buying 1 ton of greenhouse gas emission reductions. And the trick is, how are these offset programs run, and what are the incentives driving the people selling the offsets? And so we'll get into more of that here going forward. If you would, Gary, advance the next slide. So there are 2 markets for these carbon offsets. There's a voluntary market, which is set by companies and countries, and like the city of Austin has voluntarily pledged to become carbon neutral. And this is a pretty big market. In 2018, there were 300 million traded carbon offsets in the voluntary market. That's equivalent is about 100 metric tons of carbon. Then there are compliance offsets that are used to meet legally binding caps on carbon, like the EU's emissions trading system. So these are 2 different markets that we have to deal with. The compliance markets have jurisdictional issues, but they are largely defined by the market they're in. So for instance, the EU's emissions trading system uses an EU jurisdictional boundary, whereas the voluntary market has struggled a little bit more, my understanding, with the jurisdictional issues. And that's where I think a lot of the opportunity is for a legal solution, possibly a technology solution using blockchain and distributed ledger. So there are 4 requirements for a reliable carbon offset. The first is the idea of additionality, meaning that you have to be able to prove that your carbon offset would not have happened anyway. That wasn't just something that you're taking advantage of through an existing process. And this requires some rigorous and transparent accounting, going back behind what is being offered to understand, what is going on the ground where the offset is taking place. And so that additionality requirement is sometimes difficult to establish. The next requirement is permanence. So permanence is important when you're selling a carbon offset, and a lot of these carbon offsets have been through reforestation plans. The problem with that is that Mother Nature has something to say about reforestation, and it'll come in and destroy huge amounts of reforested area. And so those carbon offsets may not have the effect that they should have had. Plus, we know that trees, when you plant them, it takes a long time for them to grow to a point where they're actually sequestering a lot of carbon. So there's an issue there with regard to timeframes. So the permanence of the carbon offset is also a quality issue that you have to look at. And then I think what Phil touched on is double counting. You have situations where a carbon offset is sold once, and then it's sold twice, and sold a third time, and so on. And sometimes it just remains on a seller's balance sheet. This has been the subject, I understand, of Article 6 of the Paris Climate Agreement, and that's still not agreed upon. So this double counting issue and how that's solved, blockchain has already solved that. So that technology exists to solve that right now. It's just a matter of getting the parties to cooperate. And then there's leakage, which is a situation where an industry in country A with a cap and trade compliance plan relocates all of their polluting activities to country B where there's no cap. And that's something that, we have to be aware of. This is a global issue. The greenhouse gases are global issues, and, companies that are producing products that have greenhouse gas emissions as part of the production they have incentives to go to countries where there are no caps and they can do these things at a lower cost. So these 4 requirements all require accounting, good governance, and cooperation amongst countries and across jurisdictions. And so it's these jurisdictional differences that, cause a lot of problems. And, I think that there is a way to solve this using technology, because once you start to trust the processes, the hardware, and the software that are in place, you can have some certainty about what it is that you're purchasing. So next slide, please. So this was an interesting finding. I thought coming into this that the jurisdictional issue was going to be essentially that you might as well stay within one jurisdiction to be sure of your carbon offset and to have some certainty of it. So if somebody's selling me a carbon offset, at first I thought I'd prefer to buy it from somebody here in Maricopa County so that I can go to Maricopa County Superior Court or Arizona District Court and sue them and get some satisfaction. But the reality is a little more complicated. And another factor is that places like the Amazon, where the rainforest is being, degraded and deforested at a large scale, it has real impact across the globe. And project-based projects where they were, just one project in the Amazon was selling carbon credits, typically had a lot more problems in terms of being enforceable and meeting those 4 requirements that I went over previously than cross-border initiatives, which basically tied in various groups and across jurisdictions to leverage their different capabilities. And one example that I read about was an example where a tribe within one subdivision of Brazil took on a project, and they helped monitor the process there. And they also were able to incorporate, because their lands stretched beyond just the Brazilian border into other countries, they were able to bring the other countries on board. And when that happened, what they found was they were able to get, through a wider jurisdiction, more accountability and more enforcement. And that's where the rubber meets the road in these projects. A lot of times you need to have a government involved in addition to the private market. And so now California has developed something called the Tropical Forest Standard for its statewide cap and trade system, which is very rigorous and has a requirement that any tropical forest compliant offset has to include some sort of native tribe participation in the rainforest, in addition to several other requirements, with the thought process being that these requirements are going to force cross-border jurisdictional enforcement and come up with higher quality offsets. The other thing that California was focused on was that the deforestation of the rainforest has, they think, about a 20% impact on their rain and about a 50% impact on their snowpack. So they've tied together, the fact that the Amazon deforestation is affecting them and affecting their water supply. So I thought that was an interesting finding as well. So next slide is, so this Charlie Munger quote I think is great. Never ever think about something else when you should be thinking about the power of incentives. And there are a couple of examples here of incentives driving people to do the wrong thing. So there was an HCFC 22 manufacturing company in China that for each unit, and HCFC 22 is a refrigerant. So when they created this refrigerant, they also created 5 times as many HFC 23 gases, which are greenhouse gases and very destructive. And it was determined that they were basically manufacturing more refrigerant than they needed to, just so they could have a high baseline, and then they could take credit for shutting down and destroying the HFC 23. So that's the power of an incentive, incentivizing them to do the wrong thing. Same type of story in 2011. There was an entrepreneur who I think honestly thought he was doing the right thing, but he ended up getting approval of a local tribe off the coast of Canada to dump a bunch of iron tailings into the water, then created a huge algae bloom that was supposed to create offset credits, because the algae was an offset credit, and then he sold those, generating millions of dollars. So these are the kinds of things that have happened in this early market, and these are the kinds of things that I think we as lawyers and as people who want to see blockchain and distributed ledger technology tackle these problems, I think what we need to think about is how do we develop a system that will incorporate all of the data associated with the carbon offset and really track that pedigree and be able to understand, where it came from and what maybe some of the adverse consequences were of the creation of that offset. So here are some ideas about blockchain and distributed ledger technology solutions to this. Additionality can be verified and established by the data set that's associated with the carbon offset. So one of the incredible things about blockchain and DLT is it really is just a superior data management tool, amongst other things, but that's one of the primary use cases. And if you had a carbon offset that's being offered, the type of documentation that should go with it should be stored on a DLT, and it should be able to be read and validated fairly quickly. The permanence issue, it goes to a monitoring issue, which now we have the capability more so than ever to monitor things remotely. We have remote sensors, we have all kinds of different machines that can read and monitor data for us and report back. And that data, can be captured in a distributed ledger technology or blockchain solution, and that can address the permanence issue. The double counting issue, as I referred to earlier, has already been solved with regard to cryptocurrencies, and Bitcoin solved that back in 2009. So that's not a difficult problem to solve for a blockchain or DLT type solution. And if we utilize all the capabilities of the semantic web, this Web 3.0 that we're building, where all these machines are talking to each other, they're reading and writing to each other, if we can harness that software and hardware with the correct processes and people, then we should be able to offset leakage where that might occur. We can monitor company A and see if it is moving its polluting activity to another country and track that. That data should be readily available. So yeah, and then I think the power of a decentralized network to validate and verify participants, projects, and carbon offsets is definitely doable. In Philip's discussion, he talked about the idea of liquidated damages, and it occurred to me that the decentralized finance space, which is blowing up right now with stablecoins, uses something called staking, which I think of it as an attorney as a bond. And I think that if you were to have a blockchain type network for these carbon offsets, it would be not too much to ask to have a participant post a stake or a bond amount that could be utilized as part of a liquidated damages clause that would get triggered if it's discovered that they were dealing in carbon offsets that were not meeting the requirements. And I think that's the last slide, right? Yeah, just some resources and references that I came across in putting together these slides, so I thought these were interesting. And then wait to get a hold of me if anybody has questions offline or wants to follow up. I'm open to discussing this further. So thank you.
Thank you very much, David. We'll now move on to our third topic, which is an issue of revising blockchain records. I mean, one of the great things about blockchain is they're supposed to be immutable, but sometimes you may need to revise them. And Carolyn Lynch is going to talk about this topic. She's an attorney and policy strategist here in town at a company called Copper Hill Strategy. So Carolyn, take it away.
Thanks, Gary. So this topic, came up during the brainstorming session that we had earlier this summer, and obviously is very relevant to the use of blockchain for enterprises in commercial space. There's going to be an instance in which bad data is put onto a blockchain, whether intentionally or just by accident. Human error is not going to go away because we started using blockchain technology for distributed database access. And so there's a lot of consternation about the status of blockchain as immutable. As it turns out, it might not be as immutable as we all thought, that it is not necessarily incapable of being modified. Obviously, whether it's through a fork or some other retroactive correction to an incorrect record, there is the potential for blockchains based on their size and their shape and their participants to potentially actually make modifications or deletions to data stored on a prior block. Obviously, the further you go back in time, the more complicated correcting those kind of errors or bad data becomes. But it's a genuine issue for businesses, whether in really across all industries, whether in the sustainability industry or any other industry that wants to utilize blockchain, is how to account for human error first and foremost, or even just change in circumstance, change in contractual terms. So for example, to David's presentation, if Mother Nature takes over, destroys a natural resource that is the subject of a transaction secured to a blockchain, the circumstances of that contractual relationship are going to change. And the next step in that relationship may need to be triggered, or if the contract didn't account for such a circumstance, then the parties have a problem that they need to try to address. And so I think first and foremost, it's an interesting foray into just a technological analysis that then can lead into some important legal issues. First and foremost is obviously kind of connecting back to the first two topics, questions of jurisdiction and enforcement, questions of when you're talking about business relationships that are married through, through a contract, through a professional relationship or some other kind of agreement. What are the terms or the circumstances in which the contract or the law governing the contract is going to allow for and enable any kind of technological change to perfect the error in data that was entered incorrectly to begin with, or a change in circumstances or terms of a contract. Something as simply as a party moving jurisdictions could require new information to be inputted. So, but one of the other areas that we talked about when we had this brainstorming session too is to the extent that personal information is stored on a blockchain, there's also legal implications for compliance for companies that want to utilize blockchain technology in furtherance of, again, a sustainability project or really any other industry. And so we're exploring kind of the implications for GDPR and CCPA compliance. And obviously, not surprisingly, to my knowledge, neither agreement actually uses the term blockchain or distributed ledger, doesn't contemplate that there's, I guess in its effort to be technology neutral, it actually created a legal gap for this new technology that doesn't function in a more traditional centralized manner. And so obviously companies that are operating are utilizing blockchain to some degree are already going through the process of trying to obtain, certify or to their customers and their users that they are GDPR or CCPA compliant. There's obviously a number of challenges with that. Both of those regulations, first and foremost, contemplate a central entity, a central regulator, that a traditional corporation that collects, stores, shares, or sells consumer personal information. And in a blockchain context, that's not necessarily obviously the case. And so the question then becomes, first and foremost, who is subject to the jurisdiction of those laws and who's actually responsible for the compliance and reporting associated with it. Obviously, questions about, again, if a consumer, let's say through the CCPA, wants to exercise one of the rights that they have, a right to know, or more importantly, a right to delete, offered through the law, again, that could run headlong into the technological capability of disclosing or removing data that has already been cryptographically stored to a block. And then again, one of the other things that's really fascinating too is the way the different laws treat this degree to which the information is encrypted. and whether it has the capability of being decrypted. The GDPR and CCPA actually don't have aren't aligned in that sense, and so you know, the CCPA actually allows to some degree a protection from civil liability and some limitation on compliance with the rights created under the law based on whether and to what degree the information is encrypted. I do think one other really interesting area to explore, most of the research and the writing that relates to, again, primarily the application of these privacy laws to blockchain technology, most of the writing that I've read talks about the friction between those two, talks about the fact that there's a significant degree of incompatibility, both for just jurisdictional enforcement issues, but also, again, on how do you change records that are largely immutable. I do think there's an interesting area to explore, which is could blockchain, particularly through its identity mechanisms, be used to actually empower individual consumers to you know, make affirmative decisions about how their information is going to be stored on the block, and in doing so reduce the potential that a consumer would have to go back and request for that information to be deleted sometime in the future. That by almost empowering the consumer to opt in, if you will, to a variety of different options or selections, with the understanding that once they do that, using the blockchain check technology, their information is then going to be cryptographically stored on a block. That could actually be a way to empower consumers and maybe flip the narrative a little bit from what has been discussed more recently since GDPR and CCPA came online. So.
Thank you very much, Caroline. So that's the end of the 3 presentations. Jay, do you want to now move on to Jason and Tony for some comments, and then we can open up for any questions or comments?
Sure. Tony, I noticed that you don't have a video connection at this point, but you are connected via audio. Would you like to say a few words about the Energy Blockchain Consortium and the Arizona Blockchain or Arizona Research Project on blockchain?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, thank you, Jay, for inviting me. And I actually got a new computer and my camera is by default not set. So I apologize for not having the time to enable my camera. Something to do with this Lenovo fancy laptop I just got. But anyway, I'm very happy to be here. I'm actually in the East Coast in Florida at the moment. And I really wanted to attend this meetup because I've heard good things about it and I wanted to be here. So this is my first time, but I'm really glad to meet with all of you. I've actually done a number of webinars myself. In fact, I have a series of webinars I've done, and so I'm a proponent of blockchain, but I also understand the limitations and also the great opportunities. So let me start by saying that my organization is called Energy Blockchain Consortium, and we are very keen on leveraging blockchain technology in the energy sector. So let me begin by giving you just a quick a preview of my organization, and then I go straight into what Jay was referring to. So EBC is an applied research consortium, and we are focused on solving some very compelling problems in the energy sector using the blockchain technology. And I am very interested in a lot of the use cases that you have been discussing today. In fact, my organization has been working with a number of utilities and other organizations such as the Department of Defense and some states in defining some of these use cases. So we can talk about that. Um, but I'll give you a quick overview of the company, and then I'll talk about some of the use cases we are working on. We believe that blockchain is actually can be used as an enabler for energy transformation. Of course, we've all heard about that, but there's ample opportunity to leverage blockchain in multitude of ways to facilitate energy transformation. And of course, I mean, I'm almost talking to the who's who here. Blockchain can be used beyond a cryptocurrency or a Bitcoin, because there are so many different use cases, such as compliance, such as GDPR equivalent use cases that you talk about, and also sustainability specific use cases. So there's a tremendous opportunity to use blockchain. Now, we're actually a Florida and Massachusetts based organization with offices in now Arizona. In fact, we have an office here in Phoenix. In fact, my chief corporate development officer is in Phoenix. Some of you might know him, Bob Fageli. But we are actually now at the moment focused in North America, Canada, and US. But we do have some presence in Brazil, Europe, and India. And we are working on a number of use cases in actually the Indian market. And we've launched a use case specific group in Europe as well. So there is some interesting work going on, not just in US and Canada, but also in Europe and India. What we do as an organization is four things. We actually do a lot of education. We do a lot of webinars, but we also do some professional conferences. We have at least 2 or 3 conferences a year. And because of COVID, we have actually become a little bit more docile, but we've done multiple conferences. In fact, the last conference we did was in a summit in Arizona last year in Phoenix in March 2019. And then we had our annual conference in Atlanta. And these conferences are based upon how blockchain can be applied in the energy sector. So we get a lot of good people from the utilities, and they are mostly attended by 150 to 200 people. And usually we have about 35 speakers on these conferences, basically. So that's the education part. We also do development of use cases. Use cases are very critical to us, because when we talk to different utilities, they are very keen on identifying what the use cases are. So we work with them in defining these use cases. The third thing we do is that we develop interoperability standards, actually, because we believe that the future in the energy sector is not hostage to a specific technology of blockchain, such as Ethereum or Hyperledger or others. We believe that interoperability standards are the mechanism by which we can actually reduce the cost and also improve compatibility across multiple systems and applications. So interoperability standards are a key ingredient of our effort. And the last thing we do is that we actually work very actively on developing pilot projects using the blockchain technology. Why? Because we believe that doing paper talk can just take you so far. As an applied research organization, we take our research and we apply that on a real use case with real players, whether it's a utility or a microgrid or a specific site. So we work side by side with a number of players. We work in a very collaborative environment with actually competitors working together. So we have like a few big companies who are working together as if they would be competitors in an ordinary day, but they are working collaboratively with us in this case. This is just a quick snapshot of the blockchain use cases that we've developed. We have what we call as a EBC blockchain use case catalog. And in this catalog, we've identified a number of use cases. What you're seeing is simply an example of the use cases for the utility sector. And we've broken them down into 8 different categories, such as the energy trading, grid management and transactive energy, consumer empowerment, DER and EV integration, emission tracking, energy data metering, regulatory compliance, and security. So I'm very familiar with non-crypto use cases. And we've been working with a few organizations in some of these activities. Of course, I won't go into the details of it because we don't have the time to do it, but suffice it to say that we have an excess of 75 different use cases that we've developed. And these are not just, thou shalt do that. Each of the use cases has had in excess of, weeks of work. Because we get together in meetings with utilities and do whiteboarding and discussions like that. So each of the use cases has hours and hours of research and work that has gone into it, basically. Now, there are 3 use cases specifically that we are actively working in Arizona. We have launched a group called the EBC's Arizona Blockchain Working Group. And in this working group, we are working on 3 specific use cases, and we've also introduced sustainability as well. And these use cases are the peer-to-peer and peer-to-business energy trading. The second is integration of the electric vehicles and DER assets on the grid. And the third that has emerged is the sustainability, which is the solar REC and ESG measurement and verification. But there's also been a demand for carbon offset, whether it's a compliance or a voluntary market. So we are leveraging these 3 candidate use cases as a pilot project in the state of Arizona now. Here is a little bit of a call to action if you folks are interested. We've received a grant of $250,000 of funding or grant, whatever you want to call it, to conduct an applied research project, actually. And in this project, we have these 3 use cases that we've identified that are going to become the basis for the pilot. And the requirement for this grant, which we've already received, is another $250,000 of matching funds from other sources. We already have partial matching funds from a few other sources, but now we have opened up for partners to collaborate with us. And I think the benefit of others to come, in addition to the members, so we have membership, people join our consortium as a member, and they fund projects. And if we are not able to take the funding from all the members, then we open it up to external parties. So right now we have opened up to external players who are interested in collaborating and participating. So you have to provide some dollars in this effort, but the benefit is that you will be an active player in actually implementing this project in the applied research. So you almost get an opportunity to work on a ready project, almost like a shovel-ready project. So we've opened it up based upon the board's decision to open it up to external players. We are also open to academia, actually. So if you folks are interested, we can talk about that. And if there is interest, then send me an email at tony@energy-blockchain.org. Let me see if I can move this thing. Yeah, so it's tony@energy-blockchain.org, and then you can actually participate. That's pretty much it. Jay, I kept it short and sweet. I hope that was okay, but that's pretty much the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be very happy to answer them.
Great. Thank you, Tony. You can go ahead and stop your screen sharing. And,
okay.
I'd just like to point out that this session tonight is a coming together of a multitude of dimensions, community dimensions, and so forth. We've got the Energy Blockchain Consortium, which has some funding from the state that's ready to go with some matching funds. We have ASU, academic institution, and we have Nori on the session, who Gary, you can introduce Jason in a moment. But part of what I was excited about when we had our brainstorming session was the possibility of this community collaboration that's being articulated tonight. So I highly encourage anybody who's interested in the Energy Blockchain Consortium and the opportunity to participate in the funding that was supplied by the state of Arizona to contact Tony and further the collaboration that we're talking about here tonight. So.
Thank you, Jay,
Okay,
for
so
the
then
opportunity.
let's turn it over to Jason then. Probably not a unfamiliar face to many of you. I think, if I understand right, he started the Desert Blockchain with you, right, Jay?
That is correct. He is the co-organizer of Desert Blockchain.
But he also
Yeah.
works for a company, Nori, that's actually working in this field to try to figure out how to create a marketplace essentially for farmers and others who are basically storing carbon in the ground, and how to use blockchain and other technology to validate that. So Jason, great to have you with us, and I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. Hi everyone. Yeah, definitely want to give all the credit there to Jay, though. While I definitely participated lots and lots and helped, organize lots of the kind of events, especially during kind of like the earlier years of it, Jay definitely is the brave soul of Desert Blockchain. So yeah, I am one of the co-founders, one of 7 actually. It's a kind of crazy story of a company called Nori. We are based mainly out in Seattle. However, I've obviously been here in Arizona since the founding of the company. We have a pretty straightforward proposition as a company. There are people out there who are wanting to be able to pay other people to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, to reduce or remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. And we are effectively the kind of network or middle layer that sits in between or orchestrates the ability for people who are removing CO2 from the atmosphere to be matched with people who are wanting to purchase that removal. So the people who are there are lots of kind of good, interesting talks about who those people are and what the motives are behind those things. One, we heard David talk a little bit about like voluntary versus compliance markets. So to kind of play on that note, Nori is pretty much entirely a voluntary market. So we, at least as of right now, we deal with mainly large corporations who have some type of social good that they're trying to create or offer as a product to their end users. So you can think of some of these headlines that we've been hearing about Apple, or we've been hearing about Amazon, or Microsoft, or any of these other kind of larger companies, and they're using carbon removal as a medium to achieve those results. And so what we effectively have set up is a marketplace that allows for the whole cycle of things to happen. This is from the supplier, like as of right now, we're dealing mainly with like agricultural lands. So this is suppliers who are performing a crop practice switch that would result in a net drawdown of CO2 into the soil for storage into that ground. And then they effectively sign contracts for being able to continue to store that amount of CO2 in the soil, and then that is then handed off to a third-party verifier who can then audit and attest to the validity of something of such claims effectively. And then on the final side, you've got the buyers who are then coming into the marketplace and purchasing those certificates that are effectively made from the verification of such removal. So yeah, I mean, we sold about, I don't know, we're a couple of years into operation now, but we were a small little kind of idea that was born out of a couple of hackathons, and communities like Desert Blockchain for sure. And so there's always fantastic things that can be drawn out of these conversations or these projects, or whatever little thing kind of happens. Like there are definitely larger stories that can be drawn out of those. We've sold, I think, about 10,000 tons of carbon that was stored in soil to buyers in an entirely voluntary market so far, and don't really see any decline in motivation or anything like that. So it's been a fun ride, and you know, a lot of the kind of discoveries that I think some of these projects are bringing to light are things that are all extremely apparent problems that are sometimes brushed aside because there's not enough people in some of these emerging spaces to be able to come up with solutions to these ideas. And so it's great to hear some of the critical thinking that's going on here.
Thank you, Jason. And we're at the top of the hour, which was our allotted time for this. But I would like to, well, first of all, if you have to drop off, please feel free to do so. But I would like to open it up for questions for maybe about 15 minutes, go beyond if you can stay around, because I think we've had some awesome presentations and awesome points, and we've got a great collection of folks here. So does anybody have any questions, comments? Just take yourself off mute. Go for it.
Well, Jay, I think I'd go back to Philip's, when Philip kind of opened everything up for discussion on the representations and warranties. I think what you've heard from Jason is kind of an eerily awesome test case to your thesis, right? All of the questions that you posed, liquidity, the ability to litigate, injunctive, you know, what the damage is, that kind of thing. And the question you posed about, you know, to what extent can blockchain solve some or all of these issues? I mean, I think it's interesting when you were giving your presentation about representations and warranties, I kept thinking, well, that's blockchain, right? Participants in a blockchain are expected to adhere to a code of conduct about future behavior, which is a warranty. And they are expected to make accurate and factual representations as to what they're bringing to the agreement, to the participation in that group. And so can the use of the technology and smart contracts and everything that, you know, and even tokenization actually give digital verification to legal representations and warranties in a way that traditional software can't do right now. And I think you could explore too, obviously, your great observation about how to verify the cancellation or termination of a certificate, right? Well, a token or a cryptocurrency, that's the beauty of that tokenized verification, right? Is extinguishing the token can extinguish the hash or the very specific code that was assigned to that certificate, allowing, to the extent it moves off the system. I don't know technologically how to deal with that, but at least within the system, that's what's contemplated by it, so that you cannot lay claim to a certificate or a credit that somebody else also claimed, and kind of diminish the actual function of removing carbon. So I think you're on the right track. I think it's fantastic, and I just think there's quite a few answers that blockchain technology could actually provide. So just my thoughts on that.
Can I just add to that? I think you're right on with that, Caroline. I mean, one of the issues is that, the three parties involved in a transfer of a offset credit, the seller of the credit, the marketplace, and the buyer, really don't care if the CO2 is emitted or not. They're doing this for the credit or the publicity or whatever. I'm sure, the vast majority of the early market entrants, for example, are doing it because they really do care. But we have no way to know that they are really doing this. And particularly if these markets expand, there'll be more and more sort of fake players in there who are playing with sort of fake credits. But what's the great thing about the blockchain is we can leverage a lot of people who have an interest in it. So I remember when I taught environmental law, right when the SO2 trading program under acid rain came into play. And basically every environmental law class across the country had students chip in and buy a credit and retire it. You know, so students would chip in $1 or $5 all across the country because all these kids cared about this. So now instead of having to pay money, they could actually go online and check to see that these credits are actually reduced. You know, so we can leverage all these people who have an interest from their planet or whatever, being safe, who have a lot of energy and time, can actually now serve as a free enforcement mechanism if they can see on the blockchain where the transfers occurred.
Great points, Gary. Thank you. And, you know, we're in a time when we are presented a lot of data on a variety of things, and that data is definitely impacting our lives. And, you know, as I experience this deluge of data that's having enormous impacts on our lives, I'm thinking, you know, blockchain is a vehicle where that gives us, each of us, the ability to go in and audit the trustworthiness of that data. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity in this whole realm of permissionless, decentralized data and so forth. It's called blockchain, but it really should be called decentralization. And a key attractive element of that decentralization is giving us the tools to audit and verify information ourselves that impacts our lives and that we care about. So, you know, I really want to acknowledge Jason for what Nori has created, because I see it as a really positive step where it opens up a whole opportunity set for people to take action on something they care about and something that's impacting them, but it's done in a sort of an opt-in way and a sort of a positive way. So, and then I acknowledge Tony for what you've launched in the Energy Blockchain Consortium, taking steps there, bringing people together and so forth. And again, what ASU has done in this whole realm, I think, is really cutting edge and really puts Arizona and our community on the map for bringing people in from all over the world to talk about these things, not only about blockchain and sustainability, but also about how all these new technologies, these new directions in technology are sort of merging together with policy and with the law. And, you know, we're really on a whole new horizon here. So, so I think, unless there's other questions, I think we'll wrap it up with that. And feel free to connect with one another on Meetup, or if you need contact information, please let me know. I'll be sure to connect you with folks, anybody watching the recording. We have these sessions once a month, and we welcome suggestions for opportunities and so forth. Our next session will be in August, and on the 4th Wednesday of the month, and we will be talking about an event called HackFS that's going on right now. Hack file systems, basically, and it's at hackfs.com, and it's an amazing global community of what I consider to be some of the top talent in the world that's getting together. I was just watching some of the statistics. There's like 470 developers competing in this. You've got the founder of Ethereum and the founder of the Interplanetary File System that are judging this event. And there's, I can't remember how many projects, like over 100 projects. So we'll be talking about that next month in August. And feel free to reach out to me, Jay Carpenter at desertblockchain.com, if you have any questions, comments. And I really appreciate everybody's participation in the session tonight and the exchange of comments, ideas, and connections. So have a good night.
Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you, Jay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jay. See ya.